Well, Alex, it's been a while, but I want to welcome you back to Conversations About Conversations. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
And we've been moving one at a time through each chapter of the book. Today, we're up to the 6th chapter. And I think it might be good to actually show what is in chapter 6. So I've put up here the table of contents for chapter 6.
Right. What I like about your books is it keeps your book entirely, your chapters. It really is straightforward, like 3 sub bullet points. That's it, right? Under prepare and plan, talking points, develop a repertoire of things, and we'll talk about that, and then following a structure. It can be a quick read if you want it to be, but I don't know that you'll get the most out of it if you just read it quickly and don't take notes. In fact, I would say it's probably one you'll read and then come back to again, and then read and come back to again at some point in your conversations journey.
Yeah. And how many times have you read this chapter?
And I'm not exaggerating, I'd say 6 or 7. And it's interesting because each time you go back, depending on your most recent conversation or where you thought you could do better, you come back and go, I didn't have a story. I didn't have a good analogy, or I used a visual story or metaphor with someone who's probably more kinesthetic or auditory, and it didn't work as well. So I actually think this ties in very nicely to the first chapters when we talked about learning style. And one of the things that I really paid very close attention to hearing on phone calls and Zoom, but even with just listening, I sense the words they use. And in your book, you talk about people who say things like, well, that's how I see it. And that's a cue. You listen to that, you get 2 or 3 of those. They're visual. Your metaphor, as you pull it off the shelf, or as you like to call it in this chapter, I think it was a metaphorical meal. Well, you need to be looking for a dish that's very visual, not broccoli. You want the sundae with all the colors and beautiful, and lay it out and describe it. And I think that will resonate much greater with that person because their brain is wired to be more visual than others. And it really is impactful. I did this yesterday on a call for someone who was into sports. I'm not as into sports as you are. I know you're an Eagles fan. I like sports, but my mom knows more about Eagles, Broncos, and all those sports than my brother or me combined. I said, well, what do you love to do? And he likes to watch football. So I used a football metaphor, even an analogy later on, and it really resonated with him. I mean, he was like really into it. I found it rather, frankly, boring. If I was being honest, because I don't love football to the extent, pro football to the extent he does. But he said, that is the best thing I've ever heard. And I thought, well, I'm glad I asked.
This is part of preparing and planning, is thinking about having a rapport plan. Having a rapport plan I don't think it's in the chapter itself, but it's pretty standard in the coaching that I give to other relationship managers, that especially, what we train for, what we coach to is not 10 out of 10 conversations, because 7, 8, or 9 out of 10 conversations are easy. There's rapport, or at least it's not difficult. Clients are not objecting to things, or prospects are not objecting. It's normal people. What we're training for is the 1, 2, or 3 out of 10, and what we coach to that people have trouble with. That's what we're training for. That's where this work is going to. Not that all the lessons and all the technologies that I bring can't help every conversation, because they can. But in terms of preparing and planning, the rapport plan is part of it. And what people normally do is, and this is in the part about the first section, talking points. People mostly prepare talking points like, here's what I'm going to talk about. But rather, it's really important to have a rapport plan. It's really important to have listening plan. Of course, we've already talked about the listening chapter.
Yep.
But thinking of all those things when we come to a conversation, that's my segue. It's a long segue, but that's my segue.
It's a good segue. And it's funny you say that, because I use a structure, and we can take this out of context, but I'm going out of order. But I use a structure called Ready, Set, Go. And it starts in the opposite order of what one might think. It starts with next steps first.
Really? Oh, this is in preparing. You use this?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good,
So
good, good.
if I'm going to prepare for a call or a meeting or even today, I would have what do I want my next steps to be elicited from the audience? And the main idea, but then up here it says establish objective. In parentheses, it says desired listener response. And it's interesting because when you think of it in what do I want my listener, my client, my patient how do I want them to respond? And if you start with that, you're going to prepare differently rather than here's what I want to cover. No. What do I want to elicit in the patient, person, or colleague or friend or family or loved one? And I think that reframes your preparation in such a manner that you're putting yourself, and throwing out a visual, you're putting yourself in the shoes of the other.
I mean, that's part visual and part kinesthetic.
Right, because you can feel
right?
it, right? Yeah.
Right. Let me underscore 2 points. Number one, you're starting with the end in mind on your planning. It's also true if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. So you're getting onto a conversation with the end in mind. But the second thing you said is, and we've talked about this one, but I want to underscore this for our listeners, and that is the meaning. This is you took of the word elicit, and not illicit like illicit behavior, but
right.
Elicit like to gather and to create a response. But the response you elicit is the meaning of the communication. And that's what I heard. I just want to underscore that because that comes from neurolinguistic programming, is the purpose of communicating, and the message received is not the message sent.
Right. The way they perceive it could be vastly different, in fact, and it could differ by every person. Like you could say the same thing, right? Same inflection, same tone, same visual, and yet you could have 10 different responses, right?
Right. So in your planning, what you're telling me is you have an initial communication, like an opener, which the next chapter is creating an opener to foreshadow there.
That's right.
But you have a certain response you're trying to elicit with that opener.
Yes. And you're actually putting, if you go in the chronological order, you're putting the next steps and the response that you want as your first order of business.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Next steps are when you think about what you want with your patient, your client, your friend, loved one, whatever, even today, what do you want the next steps to be? Now, in your case, I think it's clear. You want you want them to feel comfortable as it relates to their investments, and they're comfortable with the market, they're comfortable with the company, and they stay with you. But it may be something as simple as, we just want, in my world now, I talk to a lot of doctors, it may be as simple as saying, we just want, as patients come in, that they understand that an annual eye exam is not just to get new glasses, but can also identify things like glaucoma, high blood pressure, cancer. And so if that's the response you want, then you go back from there and say, the next steps are, we're going to take a picture of the back of your eye, right? But you're starting with the next steps first. Again, though, to illustrate the point, and what I would like the listeners to think about is, what response do you want to invoke in the people you're speaking with, the specific client or patient or whatever, the person you're speaking with? And then secondly, what do you want them to do with that? Where do they go next? So it's not enough to say, well, I want them to be happy. Well, great. You want them to be happy, but what should they do? Should they go meditate, surf, donate to charity? Like, what do you want them to do?
I want to make a point around preparation, and I'm going to read. And I wrote, while you may be concerned that you won't have enough to say, and that's a common thing of less experienced professionals, is that they're like, I don't know, I won't have enough to say. Or salespeople who overtalk and could be much more effective in sales with an effective opener and listening. But while you might be concerned that you don't have enough to say, your clients are likely afraid that you will talk too much.
Yeah.
And talking in a long-winded fashion or meandering and not making any points can cause your clients to think one of four things. One, he doesn't seem prepared. Two, I wish he would be more concise. I don't have all day.
Yep.
Three, it seems like he's thinking out loud and he hasn't prepared. Or four, he's wasting my time with these long and hard to follow answers to my questions or his statements. So avoid, right? This is the advice that I give. Avoid having your clients think any of those thoughts. And the only way to do that is to be fully prepared.
Yeah. And I wrote down what stood out to me is that when you say be concise, in my mind, concise means almost short, like too short. So, but it doesn't. After reading your explanation in the book, you say concise means to headline enough to interest them. I'm paraphrasing. Headline enough that if they want more, they can always ask for more. You don't need to go into the details. Like, look, I'll give you a great example. You go to the hardware store to get a nail. No, I just need a nail that's this big. And the guy says, well, do you want the lead granular A21A4? Or do you want the A3218 that's made in China and it's 10 cents less? Look, I don't care. I need a nail this big to do the job. But if you might care. And so by asking the question, he's trying to understand what you need. So I don't think you need to go into the details like that. And that was obviously facetious to go into that detail. But what I find happening a lot when in conversations is people go down a rabbit hole and the person on their end is just saying, no, I just wanted a kind of concise, high level overview of sort of what my options are. I don't need to know that the hamburger was cooked for 21 minutes or 20 minutes. All I want to know is it medium or medium rare? That's it. And if they want to know more, the person ordering can ask more. Is that Wagyu or is that 80% lean, or did the cow not, was he petted every day? Whatever they want to ask, they can ask. But I think going into that much detail, to your point, the end person, the person listening, gets very frustrated. Very frustrated.
Yes.
And you're spot on, I think, by saying keep it smaller, concise, headline it, and then give them enough to interest them where they can then kind of lead you down the path they want to go.
Right. Being concise doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to say a lot of words. It means to me that you're using enough words in a complete thought such that you can add punctuation, verbal punctuation, it's obviously not written, to your conversations. Like that, where I made a statement and then I clearly put a period on it.
Mm-hmm.
But you could tell it wasn't the end of the paragraph. The point of being concise is not just that it's powerful being concise, but the point is that if you're not prepared, it's very hard to be concise. That you'll be thinking out loud, you're winging it.
Yep.
It doesn't leave me with the feeling when someone clearly hasn't prepared and isn't concise that they really value my time. So that's where I'm coming from.
I think you're spot on. I mean, what I would observe with that is I don't know that for people who habitually wing it, and there may be people out there that habitually wing it, they've never actually truly prepared. They don't, yeah. I mean, I do it all the time. That you don't know. There's probably not a feedback loop concise enough to let you know that, boy, he's a rambler. And I've got some friends that I know that are very long-winded, and I love them, but I'm like, dude, get to the point.
And even if you have a lot you're going to say, by simply stopping once in a while and giving an opportunity for them to perhaps ask for more, it just makes a huge difference. That's though not totally to this chapter. This chapter is about preparing and planning. That's definitely stuff we've talked about before.
Yep.
What else did you want to talk about for this chapter? Because you said you had prepared and planned for this chapter.
So we talked about learning styles. The other thing I liked in this chapter is you talk about having a repertoire of, great French word, right? Repertoire of kind of your go-to stories, quotes, philosophy, analogies, metaphors. And I really, I think that as one thinks about how can I build a library, or I think yours was a meal, a metaphorical meal. I'll say a metaphorical library. And if you have just 3 or 4 really good go-to stories, quotes, or philosophies that you can bring into everything, make them universal.
So I want to put up on the screen a page from the book. And this is just outlining what a good repertoire includes. And you've alluded to all of these. Good repertoire includes metaphors, analogies, short stories, examples, rhetorical questions, comparisons, distinctions, philosophy, and quotes. But then the other part of this page 79 is, well, 2 parts. One good analogy, according to Dudley Field Malone, is worth 3 hours discussion. Metaphors and analogies that are made personal work best, right?
Yep.
Medical metaphors for doctors, construction metaphors for engineers, art metaphors for artists, sports metaphors for sports enthusiasts, pet metaphors for pet lovers. Everybody eats, so having food metaphors works. Almost everybody drives in a car, takes journeys, so those metaphors work. But anyway, I wanted to interject. That's page 79 of the book. It's right there for spelling it out for people.
As I read this again, preparing for this, I almost thought, I wonder if I had a short list of my top 20 just written down and typed out, because my handwriting is terrible, but just to kind of refresh myself on those every few weeks, months, whatever, and kind of think about those. How can I bring this in and be ready to employ this if I get a certain response? So I'm thinking about next steps. I'm thinking about what I want to elicit from person on the other end of the conversation. And if you have those already planned, not that you know which order you're necessarily going to use them, because the conversation can go many different ways, but at least you have some universal ones that you can plug in at the appropriate time. And you talk about this too. You talk about, you need to understand that the timing of these, it needs to make sense. In other words, throwing a quote in randomly is not going to help you. Like if they're like, why is he quoting Socrates right now? It needs to be in context of the conversation. And that's not the science part. This book is a lot of science. There's 10,000 conversations that you've documented, but there's a lot of art. And the timing part is being able to emotionally read the room or read your listeners. And I think that's the part that takes even more timing. Said another way, you can read the book and do everything you say, but if it's awkward and stunted, or if the timing's off and the jokes don't fall on deaf ears, or they do fall on deaf ears, I don't know that that it's going to be that great. So that's why I think it's really 2 parts. It's the following the protocols processes and protocols and ideas, but then it's developing what you're comfortable with and making it your own style, using your own quotes, using your own philosophy, and then bringing that into the conversation and making sure, to your point, and I think it's a great point, it's got to be personal. People love their name. You talk about this all the time.
Yes. Some people have a repertoire, use it facilely, can make up metaphors on the fly. But I've found that that's not most people, and completely unscientific data point here, but I think only about 20 to 30% of people can make up metaphors on the fly or can come up with stories impromptu.
Yeah.
Thereby, if you know that about yourself, then you have to prepare. And on that planning sheet that you have, when you started with the next steps, wherever that is on that sheet, you could say, okay, in thinking through this client, I know he likes football. I know he's a hunter. I know he does this. Okay, let me think about a few possible metaphors or analogies that I could use, or stories that I could use in order to make that powerful close to get agreement for the next actions. So that would be something our listeners could do. You could do too.
Yeah. And I think there's another added benefit there. If you think about the presentations that have resonated the most with you, you remember things that bring emotion and that you can identify with. So that person that plays football or hunts or whatever, if you really knock the cover off the ball, for lack of a better phrase, they're going to remember that. And I found that what will end up happening is they'll actually come back to you and say, oh, I remember that guy that from years ago even. He really had a great presentation, and they'll remember something and think, how possibly could they remember out of tens of thousands of conversations they've had since then? And it's because they don't remember necessarily everything you said, but they remember how you made them feel.
So I want to tell you a story about
Sure.
this. So a number of years back, I took on a client who was hanging on by the skin of his teeth, didn't really want to stay with my company, talked it through. A football metaphor worked brilliantly to get him to see how I envision my role vis-a-vis how I serve him. But the one thing that came out, and it was unexpected, was he asked me my favorite movie. And I said my favorite movie was Casablanca. And it happened to be his favorite movie as well. So then, because I've watched that movie a number of times, I'm able to draw on that at different points in the relationship. And then because it was a new client I was working with, I was able to close with the way Casablanca closes with when he says, Louis, this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
I love it.
And so I was able to say that, but able to draw. So then in that was unforgettable for me. And I'm pretty sure for him, he's still a client.
Sure.
And he always says, I wouldn't be a client without Ivan. I wouldn't be a client without Ivan. He tells everybody. And he tells me too. But I think it was connecting with him on our favorite movies, which I didn't know. You can't plan that. It was the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Right. And to get to that, we talk about the rapport sandwich. We talk about the repertoire. I doubt that you would have got to Casablanca, the movie, unless you did that rapport sandwich first and you prepared and thought, I'm sure you knew he's a Michigan grad. You knew probably a few things about him. And so you might have even looked at his LinkedIn profile, gathering this information to make it as personable as possible. And to me, I know it's an alliterative statement, but in order to plan and prepare and plan, you got to get personal. And that means you got to know your audience.
In this day and age, you can prepare and know a lot about a person before you call them. I'll look up people's houses
me too.
On Google Maps. I'll also look at it on Zillow and Redfin. And of course, if they've listed their house relatively recently, there are not just pictures of the outside, there are pictures of the inside of their houses.
Oh, the entire house. Yeah.
Yeah. And you definitely have to build rapport and kind of set the stage of, I'm about to say something that may seem a little creepy if I have been, that you may feel like I'm stalking you, but I was just curious where you lived. I pulled up your house. I see you have a pool in the backyard. I see you're around a lot of lakes. For someone like myself that does the great majority of my work as a relationship manager over the phone, it's like I'm going to their, literally could be like I'm going to their living room or their kitchen and say, oh, you have a really beautiful kitchen. I love the colors. Yeah. You want to use every opportunity possible to connect with people. And if someone has looked me up, looked at where my house is and has seen the inside of my house, that's a lot of preparation to do that. And I'm either really weirded, creeped out, or impressed, depending on the person. But obviously in my work, being in financial services, helping people reach the goals and dreams of being able to buy houses, be able to retire, what kind of lifestyle, like the house that you live in now, is that the kind of lifestyle you want for the remainder of your life? So I've been able to do it, but I have long-term trusted relationships. Although having said that, I will do it because I'm setting the stage for, I care about you. I care about your house. I care about what your life is like. It's a big part of my preparation, and I'll use anything I can in order to be better prepared for a conversation, for a new relationship.
That makes sense. And I think that makes sense because, and again, in context, you are planning. Now, if you were just calling randomly, or if you had I'll call it a tertiary relationship, you're gonna scare some people, right? But you're involved enough to talk about, what their planning is all about, their goals, how they think about the future. You're starting to understand their family probably dynamics, marital status. education, all those things that you put together to build a profile. And I think you're absolutely right. The technology now is so great. I use a bunch of different tools to see their house, how they vote, how they contribute to things. No, I mean, I get a full profile because I want to know as much as I can. Now, I might not bring that up, but I see no reason. Knowledge is never going to hurt you. It's only going to help you. You can disregard some of that knowledge. For example, if you find out through your research that they're very adamantly one way and you might be the other, that's okay. It's a free country. But you might change the wording a little bit if you see that they're very concerned about a particular topic and they might be more fear driven than another group maybe, or another person. So you can change the wording a lot. I found it works really, really well.
Well, we're getting to the spot of the episode where we need to wrap up. So I'm going to ask you if you would like to make a closing statement.
The number one thing I want to do is be always seeking improvement and always trying to do a little bit better job. And so if you're not preparing, you're probably winging it. And God bless you if you're one of those very few people that can wing it all the time and knock it out of the park. And I would encourage every listener just to think about even 5 minutes of prep goes a long way. And there was another great quote, I'm paraphrasing, from Abraham Lincoln, which I love this one. If I had 1 hour to chop a tree, I'd spend 59 minutes sharpening the axe first.
That's great. I want to close with some foreshadowing to where we're headed for the remainder of the year, because we're now going to enter into definitely the science part of the book. It's in this chapter, but it's the tail end of the chapter because it is the bridge to the remainder of the book, the last 4 chapters. And it's introducing the concept of something that allows you to be planful in that you have a structure you can follow, but very flexible at the same time. The conversation structure that I pioneered, created, have practiced again and again is create, explore, address, and resolve. And what we'll do, Alex, is we'll take one episode for each of these 4 things on creating a conversation, exploring, how you use explore to address both needs and objections. And it's an iterative process. And then ultimately to get to that spot on your conversation preparation sheet that says, here's what I want to resolve. Here's what I want the next actions to be. So I'm going to close with that foreshadowing. I want to thank you, Alex, for being on this journey with me, for being so supportive, and this learning journey, this improving journey. We're on it together. We've been on it together for a while, and
Long time.
I see a lot ahead too, which is very exciting. So I want to thank you for all of that and for being a part of this conversation about conversations.
I want to thank you for 10,000 conversations and documenting it. I keep saying this to people. Imagine taking the knowledge from 10,000 different conversations, having the discipline and courage to write down and admit that you could improve every time. There's never a perfect conversation. Always willing to kind of give yourself well, I could have done this a little better. And then going back and to use your iterative example and saying, let's do this better. Let's do this again. Let's create another conversation. Let's explore. And then let's get to the resolve stage and address it and do these in order, but keep doing it and keep doing it. And I think that 5 years from now, these videos are in curriculums or curricula throughout the world, not just the United States, not just Canada, everywhere. And people are using these as tools to teach people to communicate more effectively and build stronger and deeper relationships in every facet of their life. So thank you for writing this. Thank you for publishing it. Thank you for being courageous enough to actually sit down and admit we have a deficit in this country on communicating and conversations, and it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.